There's a lot of divisive opinions floating around on the internet. Countless arguments happening every single day over the stupidest of subjects. So I'm glad that as a community we can all come together to agree on one simple thing. Garfield sucks. Starting out as a comic strip in the 70s, creator Jim Davis introduced us to the world of Garfield, where a fat cat sits around the house of his owner John, eating lasagna, hating Mondays, and abusing his fellow man. That's kinda it, nothing else ever happens. It absolutely exploded in popularity, especially when it came to licensing, where someone like the Calvin and Hobbes creator said he didn't want to ever license out his comic characters as to not cheapen the brand. Jim Davis said screw that and slapped this thing on whatever he could. Plushies, t-shirts, phones, those sticky little things you put on your car, it was Garfield mania. For some reason? See, if there's one popular opinion that has arisen over the past couple decades, it's that Garfield is kinda lame. Like, it's not bad, but not all that good either. Really, it seems that the entire brand is just ridden off of how good of a design he is. That's really all it takes in some cases. Like, let's run an experiment. Let's check out the Garfield comic that released the day I was born. March 29th, 2002. What do you think? You're wearing that? To a monster truck rally? To meet a blind date with a gold tooth? And then he gives, like, the thumbs up. Also, that's right, my birthday is coming up in a few days. And there's nothing I want more than for you to subscribe. We're so close to 500k, guys. Garfield has seen many TV shows and movies in his career. From short made-for-television specials, to the creepy French CGI one where they literally forgot to render one of the shots. Yes, this really aired on television and is still not fixed. And yet, throughout all of this, his most prestigious opportunity came in 2004, when he got his chance to star in not one, but two major Hollywood motion pictures. Both were panned to hell and back. This somehow didn't even end his film career though, him getting 3 more direct-to-DVD animated movies. All were panned. I grew up on a lot of these, especially the live-action ones and Garfield Gets Real. And with the new movie where he's voiced by Chris Pratt on the way very soon, with concept art being revealed left and right, I figured there's no better time than now to finally watch and review every single Garfield movie out there. I can already tell this is not gonna be very fun. But this one's for you, commenter. You know who you are, you're always asking me to review these gosh darn Garfield movies. Get a hobby. Read a book. Listen to a podcast. May I suggest my podcast where I recently just interviewed the creator of Among Us? That is somehow not a joke? I don't know, just a thought. The Garfield movie stars everybody's favorite The Garfield movie stars everyone's favorite cat, Garfield. As we see him living it up in the cul-de-sac, chilling with John, eating lasagna, just living that good life. I'm envious. But everything gets shaken upside down when John decides to get a dog? My first thought when going into this was, what story could they possibly tell for a Garfield movie? Quite possibly one of the most creatively bankrupt franchises ever. What can you possibly do with Garfield? Not much of this film is anything to go by. Yeah, so the entire plot of this thing is an origin story for when John decided to get Odie, much to the dismay of Garfield as it makes him jealous, not wanting anything to shake up his perfect life. But whoa, everybody loves Odie. I mean, how could you not? Just look at this frickin' guy. Odie is without a doubt the best part of this movie. He's a dog who can stand on their hind legs. This scene had such an impact on me as a kid that I forever refer to a dog standing up as the Odie dance. Basically, John is such a bore. A sad, lonely bore. He's got such little going on in his life that all he does every day is fawn over the local veterinarian Liz. So he just takes his cat to the vet over and over again, hoping that someday, I don't know, she'll ask him to frick or something? It's like the simp equivalent of standing next to a video game at a store as a kid, hoping that someone will eventually feel bad for you and try to buy it. Never worked. So because of his awkward quirkiness, John winds up agreeing to adopt a puppy for her, and Garfield is so peed off about this development that he allows the dog to run away, where he's kidnapped by an animal abuser who's looking to have him tour for his next dog food commercial. And so it's up to Garfield to go and get him back. Yeah.
That cat's puss is everywhere. TV, newspapers, t-shirts. Who would want that kind of exposure?
Do you get it? It's because Jim Davis is a sellout. There is a shocking lack of things going on in this film. It's only an hour and 20 minutes long and has like 6 locations. It feels so small in scope. You can really tell they're desperately trying to squeeze as much out of this concept as possible to fill the runtime, with all their prolonged dance sequences, song numbers, and scenes that really don't amount to much considering how much time they allocate towards them. Like, there's this whole dog show segment with wacky antics involving Garfield getting chased by dogs, and it's only for the purpose of making the animal abuser guy aware of Odie, wanting him because of his amazing Odie dancing abilities, but the scene itself feels so far removed from the world. I don't know, maybe it's because it takes place in a giant empty field, but I always forget about this part when I return to the movie. Honestly, I tend to forget about the entire second half in general. So much of it just takes place around John's house, with Garfield interacting with the other pets around the neighborhood before he's thrust into action to save Odie. If I can give it anything at all, and that is anything, I'm at the very least glad they didn't go for that whole CGI character getting transported to IRL thing. If there's one thing I can give Garfield and Alvin and the Chipmunks, it's that, you know, it's not the Smurfs. Which would have been very easy for them to pull, considering that they never acknowledge how Garfield is the only animal on the entire planet that has big, goofy cartoon eyes, yet are still trying to look realistic so they come off super creepy and fucking bloodshot. But still, it's bizarre how much he doesn't fit in with his surrounding, especially because he's frequently talking with other cats who just look normal. Classic Garfield characters Arlene and Nermal appear for a good bit here, but it's done in that cats and dogs Santa Paws kind of style, where they just film the regular animal then CGI the mouth over top of it, which just makes them look bored all the time. And I have no idea why that was done other than, I can only assume, to save money. The only other reason I can think of would be that translating Arlene to live action would look hideous. I mean, do I even need to explain myself? But this all begs the question, why can't Odie talk? Why can't he talk? Is it a dog thing? No. The other dogs are able to communicate just fine. I would offer some kind of in-universe reasoning, but would you really believe that over, I don't know, that just didn't think about it? Really though, I was surprised at how not awful the CGI Garfield was for 2004. He's pretty expressive and they animate him well. 99% of the humor in this film comes from Garfield getting injured in some way, so I guess they needed to give it their all, but there are occasional moments where that immersion is broken, such as Garfield's ass vortex. I just find it funny because despite having this Garfield who looks genuinely good, they for some strange reason used this on the poster. I'm pretty sure these are modern posters, like for re-releases and such, so I'd like to think that whoever owns the rights to this film just doesn't even have the original model anywhere, and so had to do this from scratch.
Out of my world, Red. I'm gonna call somebody about this. He'll be on the block. This is police brutality.
Oh wait, yeah. I forgot to talk about arguably the most interesting thing about this movie. That isn't even in the movie. It's Bill Murray. Oh. So Bill Murray voices Garfield in both the live-action movies, and he's been very public over the past few years about how much he regrets having taken the role.
You have any regrets?
Garfield, maybe?
Like, very public.
So they showed me the whole movie. I sat there and watched the whole movie. And it was it was insane. I said, who cut this movie? Give me his name. We gotta find him and we gotta kill him.
Now, Bill Murray likes to cite a funny little story as to why he even took the role to begin with, being that when approached about it, he assumed that the writer was Joel Cohen of the Coen brothers. But in actuality, it was written by Joel Cohen with a H. Or if you're American, with an H. Because of this, he signed on without reading much of the script and apparently hated doing the whole thing, even deciding to take on the task of trying to fix the film himself, spending hour after hour going through it multiple times trying to make sure it was as good as it could possibly be. When asked about this story, co-writer Alex Sokolow was quoted saying, "That's complete horseshit." Well then, I could see why Bill shares the story around so much. Not only does it have a nice little funny setup and punchline, but also it absolves him of any criticism like, I'm with you guys, I didn't even want to make it. When in reality, there's probably a very reasonable explanation for all this. Money. Despite all this, you can tell how miserable the guy sounds when reading these lines, but luckily, because of Garfield's character, the tone matches perfectly. I couldn't imagine anyone doing a better job than an elderly man who sounds like he had the soul sucked out of him. Or Chris Pratt. Saying that though, there is so much fucking noise in this movie, there is never a goddamn second of silence. Anytime Garfield's mouth isn't on screen, and they don't have to worry about lip syncing, they just go to town with fucking quips and puns and shit.
Thanks, everybody. Well, thanks for saying so. It's nice to hear.
We're a whole street full of heroes.
Sounds sincere. Thank you.
Yeah. Heroes!
There's not really much to say about this one, strangely enough. All the others are infinitely more interesting. Which sucks, because this was the one I remember always wanting to watch as a kid, because I had the second one on DVD, and so anytime I saw the first, it was like a little treat, you know? But if you were a kid in the 2000s, you could go much worse than this. It's really just fine. There's silly cat antics, funny dog dances. Garfield is such an iconic character that they could have literally just sat a camera in front of a fat orange cat for an hour and a half, and folks would have went to see it anyway. Because the Garfield movie ended up raking in $200 million on a budget of only $40 million. So it's no surprise that despite the overwhelmingly negative reception, they would greenlight another. And this one was gonna take Garfield to the land of England. Garfield Chew, Tale of Chew Kitties, mate. Only 2 years later in 2006, we saw the return of our favorite orange feline. Jesus, I cannot sound any less sarcastic throughout this, can I? Like I said, this is the one I had on DVD as a kid, so I watched it religiously, to the point of actually getting sick of it, which is rare for a kid to feel towards a cartoon, so this was actually my first time watching it in like 10 years. But after this, I'm off the stuff for good, promise. Oddly enough, Garfield 2 has become a regular talking point on this channel. No, really, I think I may have the record for the most Garfield 2 mentions in a channel's history. This was mainly because as a kid I was given the choice in a game store to buy either Shadow the Hedgehog or Garfield 2, and living in the UK I thought guns were the devil and got Garfield obviously, in which I proceeded to play it for 5 minutes, put it down, and never picked it up again. It did that thing I despise where movie adaptations will either start halfway through the film, like here you begin with Garfield already in the castle in England, or you'd have the ones that take place after the movie, like the Wreck-It Ralph video game, which is not as good as it may sound.
I'm a bad guy, capital B, capital G, but I'm not a bad guy. I'm gonna wreck it!
Anyways, this movie fast forwards a little bit, with John finally wanting to ask Liz to marry him, and so he has to travel to England to propose as he just can't wait any longer, with Garfield and Odie stowing away in his luggage, which Liz just doesn't question. Like, if I entrusted my boyfriend with a dog and saw he was letting it fly with him inside a bag, I'd have a couple choice words, but whatever. John is a terrible pet owner in general. They literally escape the hotel room immediately, and when he finds them wandering around the streets, all he can say is,
Garfield? Odie, what are you doing here? Do you know how bad I would feel if I lost you here?
yeah, I certainly believe that. Get a leash, asshole. It's here when doing their Thriller Moment sightseeing tour that Garfield winds up being mistaken for the Prince Cat of Carline, creatively called Prince, and is taken back to the castle to fulfill his royal duties of sitting around and getting whatever he wants. Oh shit, yeah, the British stuff. There's like a whole other movie happening here that this Garfield nonsense is slapped onto, and I quickly remembered it was the sole reason I got so sick of it as a kid. See, something I always hated was when you'd go to watch a movie about Sonic the Hedgehog, let's say. You know, you see the wacky trailer, you go to the movies and pay $15 for a ticket and then whatever extra for food and drinks. Or you torrent it online for free, only to sit down and realize that in a movie titled Sonic the Hedgehog, just as much time is dedicated to this random human character who has a plotline so boring you struggle to find out how it even correlates with a silly cartoon hedgehog. This is not a diss on Tom the Cop, I like him in that movie, but you'd be hard-pressed to find somebody who wouldn't have just preferred a Sonic movie where the main character is Sonic. Alright, whatever, let's use a different example. So you're gonna go see Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Basically, what I'm getting at is, for all its faults, the first Garfield movie does indeed feature a lot of Garfield, and that's more than I can say about this one. So there's this royal family, of which one of them has recently passed away, leaving her entire estate to the cat, and very reasonably, might I add, her nephew gets pissed off that it wasn't left to him, as his allowance is now only £50 a week, roughly around £2,500 a year. Gotta say, I'd be pissed too. Because of this, he tries to kill the cat, drowning it in the river, which is why Garfield was mistaken for him and brought into the castle. And so in classic switcheroo fashion, Prince is now in John's possession. And so now the nephew can enact his plan to make the castle more of a tourist spot so he can make money. I love that Garfield has no storytelling potential at all, so both the movies are just kidnapping plots. See, they don't disclose that stuff on the trailers and posters. They present it all as, whoa, 2 Garfields? But fail to bring up the 30 minutes of real estate discussion. Because of all this, we barely even get to see the 2 Garfields interact, despite that being what all the advertising revolves around. By the time they meet each other, there's like 20 minutes left, and the stakes are so unbelievably low that it doesn't even seem like the actors care. When John and the nephew are having their standoff, Liz doesn't even look like she realizes they're being filmed. Wait, what is the threat here? Like, what is he gonna do to her? John is currently holding a fucking crossbow, while he has an old-timey gun that was sitting on a stand, but he's holding it at John and not the hostage, which is his only leverage here. And then because of that, John just Just puts down his crossbow. Like, why? What's he even gonna do to her? If he shoots her, then you use your crossbow, John. I can't believe the writers to Garfield, Tale of Two Kitties might not have cared. Don't pay attention to all that, though. The real stars here are all the new fun animal buddies we meet on this adventure. Prince is voiced by Tim Curry. That's everything interesting about him. He doesn't really do anything while he's with John other than pointing out that Garfield loves to sleep, and that he also likes lasagna too. These films don't have the most substance, do they? Other than him, there's all the animals who live on the estate, all of whom talk with their funny little British accents. And I couldn't even pay attention to it because I was so busy feeling terrible for the real-life animals who had to be tortured for a movie like Garfield 2. As a kid, this moment always made me laugh out loud because funny fat dog fall down. But now I can't help but feel awful for the thing. If this was the take they used, can you imagine how many times it must have fallen off the table? You can definitely tell that as a result of there being more CGI elements, they had to cut back on Garfield a little bit, to spread the budget around, because he looks way worse this time. I don't know, his colors are just way more dark and muddied this time compared to the first. That one genuinely looked kinda colorful. And this was definitely present in the first film too, but it's way more noticeable here. But Garfield just looks like he's made out of jelly, he's so weightless. Especially in the scenes where he's standing up and dancing or whatever, it looks borderline mocapped. Overall, I definitely don't think I'd say that Garfield 2 is a better movie than the first, mainly considering that Garfield plays such a little role in the overarching story, but at the same time, it does feel like more of a movie, and not just some made-for-DVD special. I'm mostly surprised that Bill Murray decided to bother coming back for this one. You know, especially considering he only even did the first one because of a dumb mistake. I guess we'll just never know why he came back. Costing a bigger budget and not drawing in anywhere near as big a crowd, this sadly marked the end of the live-action Garfield cinematic universe. Sad times all around. I think this right here is when Garfield reached its peak in cultural popularity. What really has he done since, other than TV shows and straight-to-DVD movies, which makes me genuinely curious as to how this next one will do box office-wise. If you didn't know, it's going to be entirely CGI, and we don't know a whole lot of info yet other than what can be assumed from the concept art and plot synopsis, which claims it'll be about him getting involved with a mob in some way where he meets his long-lost father. And judging by this art, we'll probably also see the reveal of Baby Garfield. Yeah, definitely not late to that trend. If anything, it'll probably just come and go like that new Smurfs movie coming out. Everyone complained about the live-action ones, saying it should have been animated. Then they finally go and make an animated one, and nobody watched it. But this was not the only Garfield content I was consuming as a kid. See, only 1 year after Garfield 2 crashed and burned, we saw a whole string of Garfield movies coming out. From 2007 until, well, 2009. A short run, but surely that isn't indicative of the quality of these films by any means. I'm sure of it. I only grew up with the first one here, so let's take a look at this trilogy, and see if Garfield just works better in the medium of cartoons. Okay, so this movie starts on one of the eeriest notes I think I've ever seen. Get real. This was the first of 3 direct-to-DVD CGI Garfield movies that came out in the late 2000s, none of which seemed to be all too popular. I myself only got it from one of those bootleg DVD stands along with Kung Fu Panda, but nobody I knew growing up even knew what this was. Interestingly, however, is that these were produced by Paws Incorporated, meaning the original creators had way more involvement. Jim Davis even writing this whole movie by himself, and supposedly had been wanting to make it since 1996. So how did it turn out? It's really good. Did that sound believable enough? Funnily enough, this was planned at first to have a full theatrical release, but ended up only premiering that way in Turkey, and yeah, that was without a doubt the right call to make, just look at it. Garfield Gets Real sees Garfield being transported from his cartoony comic dimension into the real world. Massive asterisks on that, by the way. This right now that you're looking at, that's the cartoon world. Want to see what the real world looks like?
That's what I call a calorie burner.
Well, I don't know why or who decided it, but for some strange reason, the plot of Garfield Gets Real is so needlessly convoluted, way more than it has any right to be. Garfield lives in a wacky cartoon land, where cars have bubble exhausts, the houses are alive, and the city literally comes to life as the sun rises. And in this world, he's a celebrity, the star of his very own comic strip. Dude, they were ahead of the curve with this meta-commentary. Although the way they explain this is confusing as all hell. So like, there's a production studio where all the comic characters get together on a set and they have some special camera that like takes pictures of them in whatever scenario is needed, which is then put on the comic panel as a 2D drawing, and then their tech guy individually beams the finished comics to the real world for kids around the world to view and laugh at. Yeah, I'm sure kids were reading those ever so popular newspaper comics in 2007. I just don't know why they tried to make some Santa Claus-esque parallel with Garfield. Is there a company paying them to make these comics? I mean, there's clearly heads of the newspapers on Earth who we see are clearly aware of these strips, so like, they have a deal with alternate dimensions to make slideshows for them or something? I feel like just drawing the fucking cat would save a lot of time and money there, but whatever. Garfield has become so bored of this formula. His life has become monotonous, making the same tired jokes over and over again, and he seeks something more in his existence. Was not prepared for Jim Davis to actually be self-aware in any way.
Are you okay, Garfield? You seem to be depressed.
That is not a line I was expecting to hear in a silly Garfield movie. Because of this, Garfield decides that one day, he's gonna jump through the portal to leave behind his friends and family, for as far as he knows, forever, to take his chances in the real world. Garfield, for lack of a better term, gets real. And by real, I mean still a cartoon. As a kid, I did not pick up on any of the differences between the comic strip dimension and Earth. Part of that, I'm sure, was for me being stupid, but at the same time, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but this should have been live action. Like, no joke, this movie has basically the exact same plot as the Fat Albert movie, only it's way more visually entertaining because we actually get to see big fat Kenan Thompson jumping out of the TV. Here it's just the same animation but without the crappy cel-shaded filter. This was clearly done on the cheap, which makes me question even more how they thought they were getting this in cinemas. So much so, that they even unknowingly left in a Garfield comic strip in one of the backgrounds where John literally says, fuck. Fuck! I never noticed all the subtle differences between the two whenever I was younger. Like how Garfield makes such a big deal about being a real cat now, but it always left me scratching my head because he looks the exact same. But somehow I just missed the fact that his body shape is entirely different and he doesn't stand upright anymore. I was so focused on the fact that this realistic cat has a giant goofy fucking head. That's why none of this works. The real world looks the exact same as the animated one, with talking anthropomorphic animals and everything. They're also very selective when they want to follow their own rules because they make such a big point about the humans not understanding Garfield now that he's a real cat. But the newspaper executives can apparently hear him just fine. Garfield cancelled? Glad to see those racist tirades he did on stream finally caught up with him. The comic strip world somehow looks even worse. Instead of doing the smart thing and basing it on the same world as all of Jim Davis's other animal characters, it's this weird hodgepodge of different designs and none of them mix. You have the Garfield characters along with a few others who look like they could fit in with them well, but then there's realistic old ladies and the very rare cameo from other comic characters like Grimmy and Dagwood. Your guess is as good as mine to who those guys are. But then they made all these original characters like this husband and wife duo who... Why does he look like this? He's so happy. In 2D concept artwork, they're a little better, but these designs were never meant to be witnessed by the human eye, never mind cheap CGI. So eventually Garfield finds out that without him, his comic strip gets cancelled, which is a surprise to him somehow. And after realizing that being a real cat sucks, he tries to find a way back into the comic strip before they get replaced by these two buff animal things. They try to have some commentary on the sanitization of media nowadays, but I don't even really know what point they're trying to make. That people would be offended by Garfield if it came out now, but if someone out there is genuinely offended by fucking Garfield, then they have other problems they need to sort out.
That cat just kicked the dog off the table.
Oh, the horror! How violent!
Also, like, why would their replacements be on Earth? Wouldn't they be employed in the comic dimension? Why is Garfield still John's pet in the comic dimension? If John can understand him and goes to work with the guy, completely capable of doing things by himself, then why does he still refer to him as a pet? Answer me, please. One dense party ending later, and we finally get to the end of Garfield Gets Real. Him coming to terms with the fact that he can never express being unhappy with anything in his life, and seek change for the better. Aww. And play the stock sound effect. Wait a minute. He didn't talk about lasagna one time in this bloody film. Garfield Gets Real? More like, Garfield gets a very negatively worded review. While I definitely prefer the idea of a solely animated Garfield movie over live action, those were certainly better than this schlock. It's just mindless, meant for the absolute bottom of the barrel at used DVD stores around the world. I can't believe this is what Jim Davis had his eyes set on for over a decade. And there is a solid idea here. Again, it is literally the plot of the Fat Albert movie, but it just doesn't go far enough with this idea, and instead it wastes its time making it as complicated as possible. And by complicated, I mean confusing. And by confusing, I mean shit. Must have made back its money though, because only a year later, we'd see the release of the next installment in the trilogy, Garfield's Fun Fest. I don't like the way he's looking at me on that poster. It's time for Garfield's Fuck Fest. Yeah.
Life seemed so much more manageable when they approached it with humor.
What is with that cut? So this one takes place in the same universe as Gets Real, unfortunately, meaning they mainly reuse a lot of locations from that one. The plot here being that the comic strip studio are hosting their yearly talent show, where Garfield, of course, always wins. But this year he's got some new competition. Chad. His name's not actually Chad, I just couldn't remember what it was. With Arlene wanting to do some dance instead of the usual stand-up routine, she abandons Garfield to do her performance with Chad over here instead, leaving him to realize that he's not funny. What is it with these movies and being depressingly meta? So Garfield, feeling like his humor is stale and everybody is sick of him, sets out with Odie to try and find the funny water. It's from an old storybook, I guess, in the hopes of becoming funny again in time for the big talent show. I can't believe they made an entire movie about how unfunny Garfield is. There is honestly nothing to this one. When I said before in the video that the rest of these were infinitely more interesting, I lied. I hadn't even watched these ones by that point, because I would watch the first Garfield movie 20 times over before going to watch this shit again. It follows such a basic formula. They go along their journey, run into a kooky character, they give Garfield some advice which he doesn't listen to, and then move on for the cycle to repeat a few more times before they finally meet Freddy Frog, the creature who first discovered the elusive funny water. He's voiced by Tim Conway, and he's just doing his Barnacle Boy voice.
Remember, it's about the audience, not you.
It's all riddled with metaphors about following your heart and taking people for granted, putting others above yourself and whatnot. All building up to Garfield realizing that he's selfish and egotistical, but, like, I don't care. Holy shit, he's dead! Garfield Gets Real at the very least had an interesting gimmick that they did nothing with. This one is just nothing. It's just filling an hour and 10 minutes with enough moving pictures for it to be classified as a movie. It doesn't come off as if any passion was put into this, which is strange considering it was, again, written by the creator of Garfield. Exactly what you'd expect to happen happens, and Garfield loses the funny water right before the big show, where it's revealed by the frog that there was never any funny water, that the funny water was inside Garfield the whole time. Play the track. It's at this point where Garfield learns the error of his ways and does the dance with Arlene, where it's revealed that the Chad cat was normal the whole time, who I'm only now realizing is played by the same guy who does Chester from Fairly Odd Parents and also Max Goof.
That's your killer comedy? You are so going down this year, fatso.
All fine and dandy, but what does any of this have to do with him being funny? Is that the joke, that he spends the whole film trying to get the funny water but ends up just fucking dancing for his performance? What an absolute waste of time. I genuinely don't even know what to say more about this one. I realized upon watching it that I actually have seen this movie before. I was planning on making this exact video like 4 years ago, but when I got to this film I was so bored by it that I scrapped the whole goddamn thing. So like, I'm sorry, but... And finally on our list we have Garfield's Pet Force. And who in God's name came up with this? Damn, these hack movie writers sure are scraping the bottom of the barrel for ideas, aren't they? What do you mean this was a real thing? Yeah, so apparently this was an actual Garfield comic book series that ran from 1997 until 1999. I couldn't find much about it online, but can only imagine they saw how popular superhero movies were getting around that time and decided to dredge up this old obscure spin-off.
Through a mega mutant metamorphosis, they have been miraculously transformed.
Why did they animate it like that? Turns out this was just because Jim Davis was looking for more stuff to slap Garfield's face on, and one of his designers came up with a Pet Force, which ran for 5 issues and even came back for a short bit in the early 2010s, but right before that, we got this. all of that stuff was infinitely more fun to research than actually watching the movie. So, in a different dimension, there are these parallel universe versions of all of our favorite Garfield characters. There's Abnormal, Starlina, Odious, and the Mean Man himself, Garzuka. Alright. So, Emperor John is lonely and wants to find a queen, and so alternate universe Liz comes in offering to become his bride. But it's a trick because she now has plans on taking over the world, capturing everyone and using this gun that can basically do whatever she wants. Like, at first it switches people's body parts around, then it later does the same thing but also turns them into zombies in the process. Then later she makes a giant trash monster using it, using the houses. Basically, it's whatever the plot calls for. Also, like, there's no Liz in the regular universe, so where did this one come out of? So Garzuka, who is alternate universe Garfield instead of genetically mutated Garfield like he was initially, comes to the cartoon world to find Odie, Arlene, and Nermal, so that they can don the personas of their other superhero doppelgangers and help him save the day. All while Garfield kind of sits around, not doing much. Also, the Pet Force comic is a comic strip in the Garfield universe. It literally starts showing what's happening IRL in the books, so I don't know how all that works, but whatever. I will say the animation at the very least is a little more saturated, which is nice. It's definitely the most visually appealing film out of all these, but it does not save what is otherwise such a forgettable movie. They all take their stuff that'll turn them into superheroes, but it takes some time for it to charge or whatever, so a majority of this movie is just spent kind of waiting around for the magic to take effect and make them super, but even then, there's nothing for Garfield to do. They had to add a fucking cape on him in the poster just to make it seem like he does something, anything. He has an arc of learning to be there for his friends in case someday they get kidnapped and get involved in an alien supervillain scheme and get called into action by a tall, muscular version of himself. That's an important one for the kids to learn. But really, much like last time, there's nothing to say, I'd just be forcing it at that point. A Garfield movie video has no right being this long, so I'll save you from any more. We end in an amazing shot of Super Garfield Galaxy, and thus ending this shitty trilogy of movies. It's weird because, despite having a similar art style, especially John and Odie, they look the exact same, I don't think the French TV show has anything to do with any of these, even though it started the same year Pet Force came out. I guess Paws Incorporated just traded one off for the other, which seems like it paid off. That show ran for like 100 episodes, and would air all the time, I remember. Also, its intro theme has no right being as catchy as it is. What the fuck is this, Sonic Mania? That show definitely seemed to capture the Garfield world in animation better than these ever could. Although, I remember they did not shy away from all the meta stuff, they loved that shit there. Maybe eventually I can return to this with an extensive look at the Garfield show sometime. I doubt it. This sure was a video, huh? Going in, I was not expecting to say that we peaked with the live-action movies, but that seemed to be the most quality Garfield movies out there. Please God, let the Chris Pratt one be good. This makes me wonder though, because Garfield has had plenty of other TV shows and specials before from decades ago. Were those just as bad? Let me know in the comments if you've ever seen them before, because after watching this, I think I'm Garfielded out for the next 50 or so years. If I were to rank these from best to worst, it would go Garfield 1, Garfield 2, Garfield Gets Real, Pet Force, and then Fun Fest. But please let it be known, none of these things are gonna blow anyone away. And with that, I'll see you next time. And always remember, I hate Mondays. Why aren't you laughing?